What's up, guys? Welcome to the latest edition of Ungoogleable. I'm Johnny Stofko, I'm your host, and today we're coming live on location at Urban Green Sydney with the director, Noah Verin. So you see all these plants around us, you see all these living organisms. Noah's behind the guy behind this. Noah, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much. Thanks for having me.
So when getting ready for this podcast and this interview, talking to you, I've done a little bit of research, learning about vertical farming, learning about sustainability. So with just those two words, for the people out there watching this or listening to this who might not be in the know about vertical farming and sustainability farming, kind of educate us on that.
Okay, so vertical farming, obviously, because most of the time vertical farms are put in the middle of cities because the idea is to try and get food production closer to the mass population. And so because you're in cities, rent is obviously higher. That's why we farm vertically, because you have less of a footprint and you can grow a lot more produce. So if you were to stack these 5 rows of shelving out onto a normal field, that could be 300, 400, 500 square meters of space. In here, it's 100 square meters, and we're doing the same thing that we would be doing in that amount of space. From a sustainability perspective, obviously there's less food miles associated with the delivery of the product. Because you're indoors, we don't need to use pesticides, there's no chemicals used, it's completely organic from that point of view. And also hydroponics in general recycles all of the water, so we don't waste a drop of water. So you can see like all of the trays are closed, it all gets evaporated, we catch all the water out the back, there's nothing that actually goes to waste here.
So the ones watching this as a video, these are all edible though. These aren't just like put them in your windowsill.
No.
So everything. These are sprouts. These are.
Yeah. So we specialize in servicing restaurants. So these are called microherbs or microgreens if you're from the US, or actually, to be honest, most of the world uses microgreens. Australia wanted to be different, so they called them microherbs. But it's it's a big industry now, especially in the States. Started in California actually in the 1980s, more as like a health fad, because the thing is, if you look
for juice smoothies and stuff like that.
Exactly, and because they're really small, they're not only concentrated in flavor, they're concentrated in nutrients as well. So obviously California is associated with a lot of health movements. That's how microgreens started, and I think a lot of chefs then saw the product and they're like, oh, this would actually be amazing as a garnish. And then it kind of took off from there. And only really got to Australia in the early 2000s, to be honest. But vertical farming wasn't really a thing here until quite recently.
Yeah, you guys have been up and running since 2016.
Yeah.
Is that correct? And through my research, it says within Sydney, Australia, you guys are the first. So I want to talk a little bit about your intentions, both you as an individual and also your brand, Urban Sydney. What are the intentions? What are you trying to achieve, and what is your message to those out there who are just getting to know you?
So the first goal is to have a farm in the major capital cities in Australia.
Nice.
So, but the ones that because we specialize in servicing restaurants, it's got to be a city that has a lot of like a good restaurant community. Melbourne, Brisbane are the 2 ones which spring to mind. But from the beginning, there was global ambitions in the sense that I didn't put .com.au in the website because I always wanted to leave that door open if we then wanted to go global. I think Southeast Asia is like a really big market for this stuff. But what we're trying to do now, this is like it's the prototype in a way. If we can get all of the systems down to make it operable with as little, Are you looking to limit the carbon footprint? Or are you looking? Definitely. We want to make it as sustainable as possible. We'd love to be 100% sustainable. At the moment, the energy is really the only thing in here that I'm not really happy with in terms of the sustainability footprint. But there's actually plans to put in solar panels on the roof and then divert the energy down here. So if we can get solar panels and get the energy from a renewable source, then we're going to be really
Yeah, the world is constantly changing. Everybody knows what every industry's been affected. Our houses, our individual homes, the people we care about since COVID.
Definitely.
And I read an interesting article in preparation to this chat. Business Insider released an article about vertical farming, and this came out in around April.
Okay.
And the article was based around the fact that is vertical farming an answer not only to possible food shortages due to overhuman consumption, but also an answer to certain parts of the world due to COVID shortages of food. Is when you hear that, you talk about you're supplying for the restaurants, and then you hear something like vertical farming could possibly help humanity. Where's your stance on that?
Yeah, it's a massive debate, and my personal opinion, and I've always said this, I think vertical farming is going to complement traditional farming, and it's definitely going to be a large part of the resilience of our food systems into the future, but it's never going to be the whole answer, and there's a lot of reasons for that. So microgreens are one of the only products you can grow on a small scale because they're quite profitable. They've got, the variety that takes us the longest is about 6 weeks. So you've got quite a quick turnover. The average is around 2 weeks.
What's the soil like? Sorry to cut you off.
No, that's all right. We use coconut coir. So
does it have to be thrown out like as you sprout? How long does this pot last for?
Yeah, so we sell live to the restaurants. They then harvest it and then they dispose of it.
Nice.
In the US, for example, it's much more an industry where they harvest the product, they wash and clean it, and then they give it to the chefs. We sell live because there's more flavor, there's more nutrients, and it actually has to do with the regulations here in Australia. If you start cutting the product, you then become a manufacturer, and that opens you up to a lot more regulatory oversight. But yeah, in terms of the whether vertical farming will, it's never going to replace traditional farming. If you want to grow cauliflowers in here, it's going to take you 4 or 5 months per crop. And I mean, imagine the amount of space you would need. You're selling them at $2, $3 maximum. It's just not, it's not going to work. So, but definitely, it's for some products, it's going to be quite important.
Timing is something has always been interested for me. The timing of things.
Definitely.
So I'm looking around it, and guys watching this, they're only seeing half of the room. We're surrounded also by another half of what they're seeing here. Now, are you trimming them, or are they in sync, kind of like birds who flock and they form a V? Are they growing together, or is it just the cycle?
So all right, when we started in 2016, we had 7 or 8 different varieties. We now have around 33, 34. It's really hard to get all of those 34 varieties to the same, at the state where it's ready to be sold at the same time. So we do have quite a complicated production system. What you're seeing here, each tray is of the same planting. So we're trying to work on a system to make things as efficient as possible. So before we used to just plant in these trays, which we would then have to lift up, water manually, put back on the shelves. We're planting actually directly into these long trays here to make it easier. So everything you see in there was planted, on the same day. That's how they look so uniform.
Okay.
And yeah, I always say uniformity is sexy. Like I really like having,
It would. If you have a little bit of an inkling of being OCD in any way, this sort of thing would keep you there. Just because it'll probably speed it up.
Yeah.
Because I can see if this one was here,
and
that one short, it would bother me. You talked about, I used to work in restaurants back in the day, living in LA.
Okay.
And sprouts, when I hear microgreens, I think of garnishes, like you said. The restaurants will put a ribeye steak with a side and then have a little garnish. And then within the last 5-10 years, you start seeing the whole superfood movement, and now you could get supplements. I actually used to take one called something green. It was a Sydney-based company, and it was freeze-dried, and it was a powder. And it would be like equivalent to taking 80 different greens. It was super expensive.
Yeah.
And in a perfect world, like, because these are your babies, you and your company, you grow them and then you have to get rid of them.
Yeah.
What is their highest potential? Like, is it a garnish on a steak, or is it something that could help humanity solve that hunger problem, or do you know any sort of like recipes that you could put together and it really helps human performance? In your head, where do you see that?
I mean, like the research is still coming out. There's some interesting. I think Stanford University did a study on a compound in broccoli microgreens called sulforaphane, which they have not conclusively, but quite. There's quite a lot of evidence to suggest that it's anti-carcinogenic.
Nice.
So and I've been on forums, microgreen forums on Facebook, where people are talking about giving broccoli microgreens to cancer patients. When you were just talking about the powder, I know that broccoli sprout.
It was in there.
Yeah,
it was definitely in there.
It's quite a big thing. So we grow a few varieties like broccoli, radish, purple cabbage. Those are the really, really nutritious ones. I think purple cabbage has been shown to have 40 times the nutrients of the adult version of the plant. Definitely like really nutritious. I think for parents like with young kids who don't want to eat their greens, you can put like a little bit of cabbage microgreens in the sandwich. They're going to get a huge kick of nutrients, and maybe even if it's quite easy. They're really easy to grow. Like it's not that easy to grow 33 varieties at the same time. But to grow one or two at home, it's quite simple. So I mean, one of the things we want to get into in the future is, providing the education and the resources for people to grow their own.
Do you help the supplier, like a restaurant reaches out, you do your deal, do you then give them instructions on how to maintain, how to do all that stuff?
Yeah, we do, but we actually print it on our labels. We give some care instructions.
Is that more legal stuff if you do go that route?
Actually, not really. To be honest, it's more because I know, one of the best things about urban farming is that we're taking it off the shelf and selling it to the restaurant on the same day. Whereas the way the food system works, generally, it does work like this. You've got a farm way out. They then send the produce into the markets, into a large market. It goes to an agent. From that agent, it then goes to a providor. From that providor, then it goes to the restaurant or wherever else it's going. And so between the when it leaves the farm and it gets to the restaurant or the consumer, it's at least 2 or 3 days. And that's at the conservative end. You may be 4, 5, 6 days. And that's if it's here, and the rest of the food might come from out of the country. So the thing is, because we're selling it on the same day, our product should last longer than any other on the market for this particular thing. And so if chefs ever say, we got the stuff delivered yesterday, and they're already dying or whatever, well, it may have been a mistake on our end to not water it as much before we brought it into them, but most of the time it's because it's not being stored correctly. There should be no reason that,
Have you found since 2016, now I don't know what you were doing before 2016, but you're full in it now, this is your calling, you're on your path.
Yeah.
Have you found lessons that the plants have taught you? Because you keep talking about time efficiency. You've mentioned a few different times about the time it takes for this to happen, to this to happen, the time it takes for this to grow. And I'm just thinking wow, man, there's so many lessons learned in that alone. Because people being time poor is an excuse for so many things happening in their lives, for shortcomings, people falling short on their happiness. And I'm just sitting here for a few minutes, I'm just realizing that, man, there's a lot of lessons looking just at these plants. And maybe as our time is winding to an end, you could share with us some lessons you've learned from them.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's an interesting perspective. I hadn't really reflected on that as such, but I mean, one thing that has struck me time and time again is the will to live for these things.
Resiliency.
Exactly. So the farm was based in Marrickville before we moved here. We were there for 2.5 years. We just moved here in February, just before COVID started. And we would wash our containers. So we had a large concrete area out the front where we would wash our trays and all of that. And all the time we would get shoots and plants literally growing out of the concrete. There is no, and if we didn't touch them and if we didn't pull them out, they would just keep growing. We actually had a drainage channel where a lot of the water from the grow room, if there was a little bit of a trickle or whatever, it would come out. So many plants started growing in that thing just from the spent seeds. And often we would actually cut the stuff, we'd throw it in the garden, and then they would spring up again a couple of weeks later. The will to survive is just, Yeah,
beautiful
it
thing.
really does blow you away.
Yeah, Noah, thank you for sharing time with us, also
Yeah.
telling your story to everybody who watches and listens to the podcast. Before I do let you go, if they want to get a hold of you, if they want to learn more, if they want to follow you and Urban Green Sydney's journey, tell the people how they could stay in contact and follow you.
Yeah, for sure. The website, www.urbangreenSydney.com, Instagram, Facebook, Urban Green Sydney. Yeah, and get in touch if if you're interested, for sure.
I'll put those links in the show notes.
Definitely, that'd be awesome.
Thanks for that.
Thanks for the
Appreciate
chat, man.
you. Yeah.